Picture this: a single corporation controlling more wealth than the combined economies of 100 sovereign nations. Not a country, not a kingdom, a company. Its valuation? Over $8 trillion at its zenith, dwarfing today's tech giants Apple and Google combined, surpassing Germany's entire economic output, commanding resources greater than most empires in recorded history. This wasn't some theoretical economic model. This was real. This happened. Meet the Verenigde Oost-Indische Compagnie, known to the world as the Dutch East India Company. At its absolute peak, the company achieved a staggering valuation of more than 78 million Dutch guilders, translating to approximately $8 trillion in contemporary terms. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. This wasn't merely a commercial enterprise. It was a sovereign entity commanding its own military forces, naval fleets, and wielding the legal authority to declare wars, produce currency, and claim territories. This is the chronicle of the most valuable and arguably the most devastating corporation to ever exist. Throughout this documentary, we'll dissect its genesis, trace its dominance, and examine its ultimate downfall. Let's begin. To comprehend how the VOC achieved global supremacy, we must journey back to the late 1500s and understand the obsession that consumed Europe: spices. While we view them as kitchen staples today, during that era, spices like pepper, cloves, and particularly nutmeg held value far exceeding their weight in precious metals. In certain European marketplaces, nutmeg commanded a staggering 60,000% markup. The challenge? Acquisition. The voyage to the Spice Islands, located in present-day Indonesia, was treacherous beyond measure. Expeditions required over 12 months, confronting scurvy, maritime raiders, and the formidable naval presence of Portuguese and Spanish forces, who zealously protected these lucrative routes. The majority of vessels never made it home. By the 1590s, Dutch merchants were determined to claim their share. They began launching independent expeditions. Yet this ambition spawned an unexpected crisis: internal competition. Numerous Dutch fleets were simultaneously sailing toward identical destinations. They found themselves competing against each other in Asian markets, inflating purchase prices, then simultaneously flooding European markets upon return, catastrophically deflating sale prices. They were essentially destroying their own profitability. Enter Johan van Oldenbarnevelt, a prominent statesman of the Dutch Republic. Recognizing this chaos, he engineered a radical consolidation. On March 20, 1602, van Oldenbarnevelt orchestrated the merger of all competing Dutch trading enterprises into a singular, unified entity, the VOC. The Dutch government bestowed upon the VOC an unprecedented 21-year exclusive monopoly covering all Dutch commerce east of the Cape of Good Hope. But financing an operation of this magnitude presented another challenge. This is where the VOC genuinely revolutionized economic history. Rather than depending on a handful of affluent investors for each perilous voyage, the VOC democratized investment. Ordinary citizens could purchase company shares and claim a portion of future returns. This marked humanity's first initial public offering, the original IPO. Critically, they also introduced the revolutionary concept of limited liability. Should the VOC fail, investors risked only their invested capital. Creditors possessed no claim on personal assets. This mechanism unleashed unprecedented capital market power, generating 6.5 million guilders almost immediately. To facilitate share trading, the Amsterdam Stock Exchange came into existence. The VOC transcended mere trade. It architected modern capitalism itself. Armed with unprecedented capital and monopolistic control, the VOC's ambitions extended far beyond conventional commerce. Their objective was absolute domination. The charter, issued by the Dutch government, represented more than a commercial agreement. It was authorization to function as a sovereign authority. The charter explicitly permitted the VOC to construct fortifications, maintain standing armies, install governors, and crucially, to engage in warfare. The company operated under the Heren 7e, translated as the Lords 17, the ultimate corporate governing body. However, Their decisions transcended mere business strategy. They wielded political and military authority on a planetary scale. They forcibly expelled Portuguese interests. In 1619, they seized the Javanese port city, rechristening it Batavia, the location of contemporary Jakarta. They didn't merely transport spices to Europe, they monopolized the entire Asian commercial network. They moved silver from Japan to China, exchanging it for silk and porcelain, which they then traded in India for cotton textiles, subsequently exchanged in Indonesia for spices. They constructed a self-perpetuating global logistics system. The operational magnitude was staggering. Throughout its two-century existence, the VOC deployed nearly 5,000 vessels, almost double that of its nearest competitor, the British East India Company. It maintained an enormous private military force and a naval presence rivaling established European powers. The financial returns? They were astronomical. The VOC distributed an average annual dividend of approximately 18% for nearly 2 centuries. The VOC had secured total market supremacy. But monopolies aren't preserved through diplomatic negotiations. They're maintained through force. To grasp the darkness embedded within the VOC's operations, we must focus on nutmeg. During the 17th century, nutmeg cultivation existed in only one location globally: the Banda Islands, a small archipelago situated in the Banda Sea. The Bandanese population had conducted nutmeg commerce freely for generations. The VOC found this intolerable. An open market meant price control was impossible. They required exclusive access. This brings us to Jan Pieterszoon Cohen. In 1619, Cohen assumed the position of Governor-General of the VOC in the East Indies. His intellect was formidable, his methods systematic, and his approach absolutely merciless. His doctrine was unambiguous. We cannot conduct war without commerce, nor commerce without war. The VOC attempted forcing the Bandanese into exclusive contracts at exploitative prices. The Bandanese refused, asserting their traditional right to trade with multiple partners, particularly the English. Cohen determined that resistance would no longer be permitted. In 1621, Cohen arrived at the Banda Islands commanding a massive invasion force, including Dutch regulars and Japanese mercenaries. His objective wasn't negotiation, it was conquest and elimination. What transpired wasn't warfare, it was methodical violence and population removal. VOC forces systematically located and executed local leaders. They incinerated villages. They pursued inhabitants into mountainous terrain, implementing starvation tactics. The statistics are horrifying. Before VOC arrival, the Banda Islands supported approximately 15,000 people. When Cohen's campaign concluded, fewer than 1,000 remained. The rest perished through execution, starvation, or forced deportation. The islands were cleared of indigenous populations. The VOC subsequently repopulated these territories with Dutch plantation operators and enslaved labour, establishing a plantation economy under absolute corporate control. The nutmeg monopoly was secured. This pattern replicated across territories. In clove-producing regions, the VOC implemented Hongitokten military expeditions, systematically destroying any clove trees outside VOC-controlled plantations. They deliberately annihilated thousands of livelihoods to maintain artificial scarcity and elevated prices. The VOC's immense wealth rested upon a foundation of systematic violence, colonialism, and exploitation at industrial scale. For nearly 2 centuries, the VOC appeared invincible. However, by the mid-18th century, the colossal empire was disintegrating from within. How does a $8 trillion empire crumble? Gradually, then suddenly. The primary issue was systemic corruption. The VOC's scale made oversight nearly impossible. Employees received notoriously inadequate compensation, which incentivized unauthorized private trading smuggling commodities using company vessels and infrastructure for personal enrichment. The corruption became so pervasive that the VOC acronym acquired a cynical alternative interpretation in Dutch: Vergaan onder corruptie, perished by corruption. The second challenge was market evolution. European obsession with spices diminished. Profit centers shifted to textiles, tea, and coffee. These commodities proved far more resistant to monopolization, and competition, particularly from the ascending British East India Company, intensified dramatically. Despite declining profitability, the VOC continued distributing massive dividends to maintain shareholder confidence. Their method? Accumulating enormous debt. They leveraged historical reputation to obscure contemporary reality, a strategy disturbingly familiar in modern corporate scandals. The final catastrophe arrived in 1780s with the Fourth Anglo-Dutch War. British naval forces targeted the VOC fleet, decimating it and severing the critical connection between Amsterdam and Asian operations. The company's commercial activities collapsed virtually overnight. The debt burden became insurmountable. The monopoly shattered. The empire dissolved. On December 31, 1799, the Dutch government revoked the VOC's charter. The most powerful corporation in human history was officially bankrupt and liquidated. The Dutch East India Company disappeared over 2 centuries ago, yet we inhabit a world it fundamentally shaped. The VOC pioneered the architecture defining modern capitalism. The concepts of multinational corporations, initial public offerings, stock markets, and shareholder primacy all were tested and refined by the VOC. However, the VOC's narrative transcends economic history. It serves as a critical warning about unchecked corporate authority. When the VOC received governmental powers without governmental accountability, profit maximization consistently superseded human rights, ethical considerations, and even long-term viability. We examine modern collapses like WeWork and Theranos and recognize the perils of unconstrained ambition. But the VOC's story, a $8 trillion empire constructed on spices and conflict, reminds us that corporate power's scale and its potential for catastrophic abuse exceeds our imagination. It wasn't merely a company that influenced the world, it was a company that fractured it.